Clear prop.
Star 738, Yankee number 2, following twin traffic, 3 mile final, clear Pleasantville. 1 Charlie Bravo, exit in runway 25, going 4 mile final.
This is Behind the Prop with United Flight Systems owner and licensed pilot Bobby Doss and his co-host, Major Airline Captain and designated pilot examiner Wally Mulhern. Now let's go Behind the Prop.
What's up, Wally?
Hey, Bobby, how are you?
I'm fantastic. This week we are going to do another show on check rides. I think our listeners like when we talk about check rides. Lots of you out there may be studying or working to accomplish your next big check ride. Today's topic is all about the check ride day and maybe a little different spin on what we normally do on check ride stuff. But I think Wally and I hear a lot of different things from people out there that they do differently on a check ride than maybe they do in real life. And we're pretty passionate that maybe you should do all those things you do on a check ride in your real life. So we're just going to jump right in. What comes to mind, Wally, first off, that you think students hear from CFIs about check ride day that they shouldn't be hearing and focusing on?
Well, I hear this a lot, and probably myself as a CFI back when I was an active CFI, I was probably as guilty of it as anybody. But I think I've said this on the show before, but if your CFI starts a sentence with the phrase, "Now on your check ride, make sure you," then fill in the blank.
Right.
That's a flag. That's a red flag that needs to come up and say, well, wait a minute. Do we have two sets of rules? Do we have on the check ride or not on the check ride rules? So if it's a check ride day, I need to have my taxi chart out and available. Okay, that statement in and of itself is fine for your check ride. Make sure you have your taxi chart out and available. I agree with that statement, but I think
What about the first flight with my family?
Well, I think basically what it says to people is if it's not your check ride, you don't have to have that taxi chart out and available. And that's what we don't want. We don't want to have people that, it's check ride, so I'm going to have the taxi chart out. And then tomorrow when I take my family on this flight, I don't need to have the chart out and available. And then you have a runway incursion and bad things happen. So if you're doing something for your check ride, you really probably ought to be doing that for every flight, weather briefings, pre-flights. Now, I get to witness some pretty intense, and when I say pre-flights, I'm talking about the actual pre-flight of the airplane. When we say pre-flight, I mean the weather briefing could be part of the pre-flight and all that sort of stuff, but I'm talking about the actual inspection of the airplane. I get to witness 45-minute pre-flights on check rides, and I don't think that is what the applicant is doing every time. I would really
think they're showing off for you. What do you think's happening there?
I don't know. I mean, I have watched. To just give you an example, It may not be too far out of the realm of reality to see an applicant go out and they start walking around the airplane and maybe 10 minutes into it they bother to open up the fuel caps or turn on the master switch and realize that we've only got quarter tanks of fuel. So then they make a phone call to the fueler, and the fuel truck maybe 2 minutes away and maybe 30 minutes away. And then it gets hot, so now they need to go back in and go grab themselves a bottle of water. Then they come back and they start picking up where they left off. And now maybe the fuel truck shows up. Now it's time to check the oil, and they realize the oil is down a quart. So now they got to walk back in to get a quart of oil, and they come out, they put the quart of oil in. Now they got to walk back in to wash their hands because they have oil on their hands. Then they come back out and finish everything. Now we're almost ready to go, and now they need to walk back in to go use the restroom before our hour and a half flight. And I'm sitting there. It's been 45 minutes.
Wow. Well, that is a pre-flight. No question. That
is a pre-flight.
Do you think that they and maybe you don't know the answer to this question, but do you think that they check things differently, more thoroughly, more hyper focused on check ride day than they do on a normal flight?
Yeah, I would think so.
I think there's some pressure with the DPE standing off, 20 feet to the side. They're watching you,
right?
But there is a safe way to do a pre-flight in 20 minutes or less.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think some of those things, which could create bad habits for some people, but in a flight school environment, you probably want to check oil and fuel first for those reasons.
Yeah.
And then start the whole process from the very beginning, and then still check the oil and fuel again. That fuel truck comes, you're going to want to sump those tanks again. So you're creating more work on top of more work,
right?
That isn't necessarily necessary, but something you wouldn't want to create bad habits for sure.
That's a good point. I mean, if you know you're going to get fuel, don't sump the tanks now,
right?
Because no offense to fuelers out there, but never trust a fueler. I mean, my father taught me that early on. You don't know what that guy is or girl is putting in that airplane. Is it water? Is there water in there? Is there jet fuel in there? So you obviously you need to sump the tanks after you've been fueled. At the airlines, what we teach our pilots to do is when they first get to the flight deck of an airplane, we call it comforts and consumables. Check the comforts and the consumables right before you do anything else. Do we need oxygen? Do we need oil? Do we need fuel? And then the comforts is if the airplane's hot, go ahead and get the packs on and get the air conditioning going, get the airplane cooled down because we're about to put passengers or customers on the airplane. So, same thing with this. If before you check that the cables to the ailerons, let's check the fuel, because that is going to be a phone call in most cases, at least the way it is around at this airport. It's a phone call to the local fueler to come out.
So in most cases, I think probably for me as a early young private student and pilot, I probably flew alone a lot more than I flew with passengers. And if I had a passenger, it was probably a flight instructor. So I don't think I had a really good rock solid pre-flight briefing that I would have with my passengers. And I probably didn't get really good at it until I was a multi-engine pilot, because there were 3 points, I guess, on the runway where you're going to make a decision to abort the takeoff or not. And you really are diligent in those in a light twin for sure. So when you're administering a check ride, I'm assuming every student gives you a really good pre-flight. I think that's another one of those things that we probably get a little lazier on the further from check ride we go until that next check ride comes up. Thoughts on that?
Yeah, what I will tell the applicant is that I'm a novice flyer, and to brief me accordingly. And the briefings I get are all over the place, and it's outlined in 91.519 passenger briefing, and it tells you what needs to be briefed. And for those of us who have flown on the back of airliners, it's basically the same stuff that you'll get in a safety video or from the flight attendants on an airliner. Use of seatbelts, use of exits, use of emergency equipment, and ditching if you're going to be over water, and smoking, the prohibition against smoking in an airplane. But all that is required.
Yeah, so I think we probably all use some sort of a cheat sheet or something, but it's a habit that, again, I think we do it on a check ride because we know we're being examined, we're being something's happening where someone's overseeing our flight. But in reality, we should always have a little DP on our shoulder everywhere we go and try to meet these minimum standards for my airman certificate in all cases. It doesn't make a difference if it's just my CFI or it's just my daughter or it's just my son or it's the the new kid I'm taking up for a discovery flight, I should be giving the same passenger briefing every time.
Yeah.
Check ride or not.
Right. Absolutely.
And then from passenger briefing, let's talk a little bit about weather briefing. I mean, I assume, because I know what my prep was for a check ride, I had weather covering the table in the check ride oral exam room, where I had all the information from 12 hours, 24 hours, current forecast, winds aloft. I had all that stuff printed out. Now, maybe the preparation and the presentation of that's a little different for a check ride, because I'm sharing it with someone who's going to look it over. But I bet people don't always do the same weather briefing they did for their check ride for a little flight in the patch.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I see people that spend $25 on paper and toner, based on what they've printed out for me for a weather briefing, and that's probably a little overkill. I'm looking for a valid weather briefing. To me, it can be on an iPad. You've got the digital depictions of all the maps and everything right there. I do think there's a lot to be said for talking to a weather briefer. Mm-hmm. It's a second set of eyes. It's a second opinion, and you may miss something. We're gonna talk to the outgoing chairman of the NTSB here in a couple weeks, and I know one of his things that he really was trying to help with general aviation was the way we get NOTAMs. And, it's real easy to miss something like runway closure at an airport. And, you're going to fly from point A to point B, and in between you kind of have in your mind, hey, here's a nice alternate airport, but lo and behold, the runway is closed. And so obviously you can't land there. And that's where a weather briefer really comes into play. I mean, I've had briefings before where I've totally missed things, or there might be a temporary flight restriction. It's gotten a lot easier with the advent of the electronic flight bags. When you tell it, I'm going from here to there at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning, and the TFRs will just pop up and be, visually you can see it. So that's one of many nice things about the electronic flight bags. But just talking to a weather briefer, I think is really, really important.
Well, it's so much easier too. I used to think that person, whether they're a pilot or not, they have a lot more experience with the weather and routes and people filing things. I just always felt like they were kind of helping me make my decision, right? If they kept talking about the visibility and the precipitation and all this other stuff, they might be telling me something without actually saying it. They might be saying, don't go, right?
Yeah, I went back in the day when I was a very active flight instructor. This is back in the day where most larger airports had a flight service station right there. And one thing we could do is we could actually go down and walk up and talk to them face to face, and that was a nice thing. But we had one gentleman there who's I don't recall his last name. His name was Jay, and we called him Doomsday Jay. And when you called and he picked up the phone, Monroe Flight Service, and it was Doomsday Jay, you went, oh my gosh! I mean, he is just going to give us this horrible
worst case
briefing.
scenario.
Oh, it was always worst case, and so we always had to filter out a little of his VFR is not recommended, and he if we took every bit of his suggestion, we probably would have never flown. But
that's how the weathermen do it on the news today. They just it's going to be horrible today, and it's probably not going to be that bad.
Yeah.
You mentioned it, but you skimmed kind of over it. Did you want to share with everybody our upcoming guests in a couple of weeks?
Yeah, this is really exciting to me. Just to tell you a little story about how I met Robert Somwalt, who just retired as chairman of the National Transportation Safety Board. I was flying a flight several years ago, and I was going from Houston to Washington, and I was in the terminal, and our airplane had not gotten there yet, so I was standing by the window, and this gentleman came up and struck up a conversation with me, and he introduced himself as Robert Somwalt, and he told me that he was with the NTSB. And I thought, oh, okay, that's pretty interesting. He's probably an investigator or something. And we talked, and he was very cordial, just a really nice man. And at the end of the conversation, he handed me his business card, and I really didn't look at it, but he handed it to me, and I said, what do you do with the NTSB? And he said, I'm a board member. And I remember thinking to myself, well, I don't know the NTSB extremely well. Yeah, I'm not sure about the structure, but I don't think there are a whole bunch of board members. It's not like there's 300 or 400 board members. I want to say there's only a handful of board members. And so he went back and sat down, and I immediately pulled out my phone and typed in ntsb.gov. And sure enough, I want to say there's only about 5 board members.
Wow!
And he was one of them. And so he gave me his card, and a couple of years later, I'm reading the news, and I read where President Trump has appointed Robert Somwalt as chairman of the NTSB. And I read that, and I thought, wow, that's the guy I know. And I had sort of been following his career, keeping up with the NTSB a little bit. And, every time I would see his name, I'm thinking, oh, that's the guy I know. And so I immediately sent him an email. I had his email contact, and I sent him an email. I said, Robert, I'm sure you don't remember me, but I flew your flight from Houston to Washington several years ago, and I just read where you've been appointed as chairman. What a great honor. Congratulations and all that. And he wrote back to me within probably an hour. And he said, I absolutely remember you. It was flight so-and-so, and he recalled our exact conversation. And he said, thank you very much, and it's a great honor. And so especially since that point, I've really kind of kept up with his career and followed his work at the NTSB. And he just recently retired, I want to say on June 30th, or maybe in the 1st of June. But and we reached out to him and asked him if he would be willing to be a guest. And he will be a guest on our show here in the next couple of weeks, and we're going to talk to him about what the NTSB does in accident investigation and how they interact with the FAA and how it affects all of us as general aviation pilots.
Yeah, it's going to be a good show, and many of you have put in a request for us to have an NTSB investigator. We decided we wouldn't start at the bottom. We'd go right to the top, and we're looking forward to the conversation. And I think Robert's pretty excited about it, too. Looking forward to hearing what all he has to say. So let's speak a little bit about things that cause accidents and things we do on check rides there. What about weight and balance, Wally? Lots of paper weight and balances I bet you see.
Yeah.
How many do you think those happen day after check ride?
Yeah, under the, if you look in the pre-flight preparation section of the ACS, and I'm talking about private pilots here, if you look at performance and limitations, under the skills area, it says the applicant demonstrates the ability to compute the weight and balance, correct out-of-balance center of gravity, loading errors, and determine if the weight and balance remains within limits during all phases of flight. So we as an examiner are supposed to test them on this, and I do. And I see the struggles. I see the struggles that the applicants are going through to do what I consider some pretty simple weight and balance scenarios. We have probably most of the time when you're working, and again, we're talking about private pilot applicants. Probably most of the time, you and your instructor just top off the airplane, go get in it, and go. And you've done the weight and balance once, I hope, and you've determined that it works. You're within balance, you're within weight, and then you never really look at it again. So
I think actually the first time, somewhere in my early days, someone said as long as it's full and we don't have more than 3 people, we're probably pretty good, right? And I think that kind of stuck with me for a long time.
Yeah.
I added the COVID-20 like probably a lot of other people, so I'm not sure it's just full fuel and 3 people anymore.
Yeah.
But I think full fuel and 2 is a pretty safe bet. But at the same time, you don't know every aircraft you're flying. You really should do the weight and balance.
Right. I know in my Saratoga, 2 adults in the front seat with full fuel, we are out of the CG limits. We're too far forward.
Right.
So
that's dangerous.
I have to put weight in the bank or in the back. Excuse me. I have to put weight in the back or take some fuel off. Instead of 102 gallons, most of the time we can go with 80 gallons, and that's where we try to keep it in the hangars, right? Somewhere around 70 gallons. So if we do just have 2 people, we can we can both sit up front. Obviously, the other option is to put some ballast in the back, but then that, if I'm going somewhere to pick people up, it can be a problem. Now I got to leave that ballast there, and depending on what it is, I usually use cases of oil, and I don't like to leave my cases of oil
at other airports.
Places. Absolutely.
Yeah, that's I think in general, weight and balance is something that kind of grows. Your maturity around weight and balance kind of grows with you as you become a pilot, and the more once you pass private, you start flying instrument, you take passengers, you get commercial, you're having these more difficult math problems that you're solving. But the reality is you're not just going to always fly these single engine trainers, right? We're working towards flying the Saratoga, the Malibu, something bigger, faster, better.
Right.
The twins very similar, but opposite in the fact that where weight is, we put weight in the front of it, so that when you're doing VMC demonstrations, that you have a lot more nose weight, that it's all forward, and that it's safer that way. You want that weight up front, but you definitely wouldn't have all that weight up front and then put 2 people in the back.
Right.
And if you didn't look in that front, you can't just assume that weight's not in there. So you got to be smart about doing your weight and balance, checking to make sure if there is a ballast or weights somewhere that you're seeing them, weighing them, checking them, knowing what's going on.
Yeah.
It's hot right now, and we have air conditioners at this flight school. They're really just a cooler with a bag of ice and a little extra battery power that runs them. They're made for this very purpose, but you're putting 50 extra pounds in the back.
Right.
Now what? You still only have 2 people.
Yeah.
And I still have full fuel.
Yeah.
How much does that weigh?
Right.
25-pound bag of ice, a little bit of water, cooler, and a 20-pound battery pack that you would put in there to plug it into, right? So you're not drawing from the aircraft. That's about 60 extra pounds back there. That could start causing issues in the world of training. And I just think that I see a lot of people really working hard on weight and balance the day of check rides, and I don't see the same rigor that much afterwards. Now maybe people are doing it for flight, they've got all the profiles set up and they've done it, but I know I've seen people transition from aircraft to aircraft, meaning high wing to low wing. I surely hope they're doing it like they did it on their check ride. It does matter, and it could get you hurt one day if you don't do it.
And the other thing is the location of the CG. I think in general, most student pilots are taught that you want a forward CG. And there are advantages to a forward CG, but there are also advantages to an aft CG. And again, I'm not talking about being out of the envelope whatsoever, but there are some performance advantages to an aft CG. You're going to get better true airspeed. You're going to get better gas mileage, if you will. And if you're tight on fuel, that might make a difference at your destination. So we have to find that happy medium between stability and performance.
We've done shows on this, but let's talk a little bit about checklist usage. The difference between check ride day and normal flight day. I'm sure you've seen it all, Wally, but what would you say you presume might happen the day after check ride?
Yeah, that's pretty much on every landing in the ACS for private, commercial, and instrument. It says proper use of checklists. Now, I don't see how you can not use a checklist and it not be proper use of checklist. I mean, the first step in proper use of checklist is to use the checklist.
Right.
And to me, that's I hate to use this. I mean, it's a no-brainer for me as an examiner if someone is not using a checklist, because it's just such a horrible habit to get into. I fly large, wide body airplanes. And, at my airline, there are 3 things on our landing checklist. There are 3 items on it, and I have it memorized. I guarantee all my first officers have those 3 things memorized as well. But we pull out the checklist. We pull out the card, and we look at it, and we read it, and we read the items, and we verify everything. We don't do anything from memory. It's using the checklist.
And it's so important because as we change aircraft and we get to complex aircraft with different props and with different gear systems and things, what may be 3 steps in a Cessna might be 6 steps in a Bonanza, and 2 of them are pretty important for you to get on the ground safely,
yes.
right? And I say all 6 of them are important, but you can't not use a checklist to be a great pilot. Yeah, and
we have a lot of airplanes, and we won't get into the whys of this, but on Pipers, we typically don't use carburetor heat, but on Cessnas we typically do use carburetor heat. So there's something that's pretty basic, but again, once you start flying complex airplanes, putting that landing gear down is pretty big deal. And then you got cowl flaps, you got the prop, and if you do have to go around, you're going to want that prop full forward to get max performance for your climb. So it's non-negotiable. I remember when my wife and I first had kids, someone talking about things with kids that were negotiable, and we're talking about a 2-year-old, and some things were negotiable, but something like wearing your seatbelt in your car seat in the back seat, that's non-negotiable. Yeah. You're going to wear that, and if you're going to cry, well, we're just going to deal with it because you're going to wear that seatbelt in that car seat.
Yeah, the reality is while some people might have memorized, they might fly the same aircraft over and over and over again. It is a habit that, if not formed correctly, could get you hurt in another aircraft or another day, which would be very bad. We don't want anybody to get hurt.
Right.
So we talked a lot about pre-flight actions, but in general, right, the whole, am I safe? Do I feel bad? What external pressures? All these things that we probably talk through with the DP on check ride day really does need to be talked through and thought through on a normal flight day.
Yeah.
The other thing I think about, most people take check rides where? At the home airport. You're taking it wherever you normally fly. You're taking it there, and there's a level of comfort that comes with knowing the area, both airspace, shelves, altitudes. If you're at this airport, you fly west at 1,800 feet probably. You know how far, or some landmarks that get you outside the first shelf and the second shelf, and you could fly pretty much blindfolded probably to the practice area and not break any airspace on the Bravo shelves. But what if you're at another airport? And this goes to normal day flying where I'm at another airport. I can remember the first few times I went to Austin, I flew away from there at 1,700 feet AGL because I just assumed there was a Bravo shelf above me, but there's not. You can pretty much climb to your heart's content out there. And that's where you get into this mindset of, okay, am I doing the proper planning for the area that I'm in today, not just what I did my check ride, which was a comfortable area. I mean, I've heard people say, I don't want to take a check ride there at a foreign airport because I don't know the area as well. Well, that probably means you're not a good enough pilot to fly there if you can't look at some maps and get your bearings before you take off.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've heard people say, well, I've never flown there before. And I said, well, every one of us flies into an airport for the first time. I mean, it's just going to happen. It has to happen. And why are we learning to fly? I mean, we're learning to fly because it's a tool. It's a tool to get from here to there. And at some point we are going to fly into places that we're not familiar with, and you can do your research. I mean, is it if you can fly over to the airport, do some landings there before your check ride, that's probably not a bad idea. Some local knowledge of the airport is nice. On a calm wind day, what is the airport or the runway that is typically used here? Do they they like to use 36 or they like to use runway 18 with calm winds or a direct crosswind? Having some of that local knowledge in your in your hip pocket is not a bad thing.
And that talks to the practice of it. But what if we were going to take that 300 nautical mile cross country? We probably couldn't go over there real quick and practice some. There's tools, there's books, there's charts, there's chart supplements. We should be able to look up and know if it's right pattern or not right pattern.
Right.
On a sectional, we should see things like that.
Yeah.
Radio numbers, and prepare on the ground before you go somewhere like that. But if it says it's 5,000 feet and 75 feet wide, I have a feeling when you get there, you're going to see a runway that's about 5,000 feet and 70 feet wide,
right?
Assuming there are no NOTAMs like we just talked about. But it's going to look a lot like the same piece of concrete you've been landing on. You just got to do your prep before you get over there.
Yeah.
I guess lastly, check ride day versus normal day of flying. What's your perception on people making the most conservative choice on check ride day and then maybe not making the most conservative choice on a normal day?
Yeah, I see this is a little bit of a slippery slope, but what I see on check rides is almost over conservatism, if that's a word. Everybody is just spring loaded to landing the airplane or not going. I might give a scenario where you're in the air and we're short of our destination, and I'll talk about a systems malfunction. And I don't have a formal poll. I can't tell you what percentage, but I will say a majority of the people will just want to divert. They want to put the airplane on the ground. And
I guess I'm sorry to interrupt you, but what do you think's causing that? Do you think we're teaching that? Do we think it's really the check ride day? So I want to show that I'm going to be a conservative pilot. What do you think might in the whole training industry be causing this diversion first choice?
I don't know, and I don't really think they're doing that in their flight training, and I don't know how much scenario based situations the instructors are giving them. I think when they do their dual cross country, they go to the airports of intended landing. I would hope that the instructors discuss divert options along that way, but I can't tell you how many times I may give a scenario where you're about 15 minutes away from your intended destination, and you have a systems malfunction, and you're over an airport that has, a very limited services, and most of the time the applicant's going to divert to that airport. Now, obviously, if you're on fire or your engine is, your ability to keep the airplane in the air is compromised, put the airplane on the ground. But, what I point out is, okay, we we don't have any of the NOTAMs, or we may have the NOTAMs for the airport, but it's in that stack of papers, and we haven't really. We may or may not be real familiar with what's available at this airport, but we have planned for this airport that's 15 minutes ahead of us, and maybe by the time we sort things out, the airport of intended landing is only 10 minutes ahead of us, and the possible divert airport is 5 minutes behind us. What are the consequences of taking this airplane that has a systems problem into our airport of intended landing that we're familiar with? We know the runway lengths, we know the runway numbers, we know that it's got a displaced threshold, we know
the services they provide.
Yeah, we know that the PAPI is NOTAM'd out of service. We're ready for that, and so maybe continuing on a destination might be something that's worthwhile. I know in the airline, the first thing that if we have a systems malfunction in flight, we try to refer to the appropriate checklist and troubleshoot. And
you just took my last question there. I was going to say, what's the number one thing you should do when you have any systems failure, Wally?
Pull out the appropriate checklist.
Pull out the checklist.
Yeah, well, actually, the first thing is fly the airplane. Fly the airplane, aviate, navigate, and communicate. But, once the airplane, assuming it's not a controllability issue, pull out the checklist and see because it may be a very simple fix. It may be a circuit breaker.
Yep. And then you would obviously continue to your destination.
Yeah.
Lots of bad things could happen if you landed and you had no juice, no power, no nothing, and then you couldn't get the aircraft out of there. It could be a very expensive removal fee to get something out of a field or out of an airport with no services.
Right.
Well, hopefully this helps all of you on your next check ride. Hopefully it'll also help all of you on your next flight, no matter what you're doing. Dig in, do all the same things on a normal day that you did on your check ride, and you too will be a safer pilot. As always, thanks for listening to Behind the Prop, and stay behind the prop.
Thanks for checking out the Behind the Prop podcast. Be sure to click subscribe and check us out online at BehindTheProp.com. Behind the Prop is recorded in Houston, Texas. Creator and host is Bobby Doss. Co-host is Wally Mulhern. The show is for entertainment purposes only and is not meant to replace actual flight instruction. Thanks for listening, and remember, fly safe.